The following is a sermon that is heavily inspired by the theology of Thomas Merton. This sermon is meant for non-denominational Christian church audiences. Okay. When someone says they're going to pray for you, what does that mean? Public offerings of prayer are actually pretty common, especially right after a tragedy. Just this last week, after that horrific school shooting in Michigan, I saw several tweets using the classic phrase, "Our thoughts and prayers are with the victims." No doubt you've seen this too, but what's the point of something like that? And recently, I've actually seen people ask this question publicly and challenge the usefulness of thoughts and prayers. To them, thoughts and prayers are useless unless actions can be taken. Why even say it if you're not going to do anything? I actually had a classmate put it really succinctly when she said, "I have had it with your effing thoughts and prayers. Go do something." See, in light of actions, thoughts and prayers seem pretty weak. What are thoughts and prayers supposed to do? Actions get things moving. They solve problems. Especially in the midst of tragedy, actions are intuitive. Thoughts and prayers seem like the exact opposite of action, a barrier or a distraction to getting things done. And though we see it a lot now, this type of mindset is actually nothing new. Karl Marx believed this back in 1843. He believed that religion was a smokescreen preventing people from seeing the truth and taking actions. His famous phrase was, "Religion is the opiate of the people." For Marx, thoughts and prayers were an approval of the status quo, a way to keep things the same, to preserve power and to perpetuate oppression. I can easily rephrase his words into a believably modern tweet, something like, "Things would improve if only we stopped deluding ourselves with thoughts and prayers." Now, actually, as a fun aside here, Karl Marx was famously the first Marxist. If I ever invented a popular worldview, it would be called Rubrightism, or more properly, probably like Rubrightism. And my followers, they wouldn't be called Marxists, they'd be called Rubrightists. And for that reason alone, I think I don't have to worry about starting any like large, philosophical movements anytime soon. But anyway, here's the thing. I actually think Marx is right about how I view thoughts and prayers. I should be sitting here saying Marx was wrong. But I think for me, a self-avowed Christian minister, this has honestly been a fair characterization of my own understanding of prayer. For me, the purpose of prayer is that it ultimately leads to action. Most of the time, I'm just asking God for things that I want. My thoughts and prayers revolve around what I see as important. When things are good, I thank God and I pray that things stay the same. When things are bad, I appeal to God and ask that things go back to normal. In my prayers, God is present only insofar as he might tip the scales in my favor. I already see the world clearly. I'm smart. I read the news. I know what should happen. I know who needs to change. But most of the time, I'm praying that God just clears the path to action. But what does this type of understanding lead to? How does it shape my expectations for the world? For one, I know it makes me complacent. If I believe that prayer's ultimate usefulness lies in what actions it gives me, then it's exactly what Marx said it is. It's an opiate. When prayer is seen as just another action on the list of things we need to do, it becomes a means to preserve the status quo, a means to seek a previously understood comfort. I pray for things to stay the same. I pray for God to deliver my own predetermined goals. I seek justice only as far as it will continue to provide me the comfort that I already know. Any usefulness that I apply to prayer is limited to my own understanding. At the end of the day, I see prayers as a means of action, a way to apply a cosmic blessing to the things that I already know that I want to do. And what's wrong with this? It seems okay to have prayer be instrumentalized in this way, even if it does make me complacent. Isn't prayer just another action? If I go into the woods and pray all day, I better have something to do when I come back out. Like anything else, thoughts and prayers should be something useful, right? So when thinking about prayer and action, a story from the Gospel of Luke comes to mind. It's located in chapter 10, and it takes place while Jesus is visiting the house of two sisters. I'll pick up the story at verse 38. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said, but Mary was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed. Or only indeed one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Martha is trying to get the house ready for Jesus. Mary is sitting at his feet. That's the scene that we have. And this is an interesting lesson from Jesus, and I believe it speaks to the heart of what we're talking about. It's not a parable, which is an allegorical story containing some amount of wisdom, but it's a seemingly direct intervention into Martha's life. At the beginning of the story, Martha does something that is, for me, one of the most common Christian things you can do. She asks Jesus to correct somebody. It's very easy for me to identify with Martha's story. I do this all the time. If Jesus was ever physically present for any of the conflicts in my life, I would absolutely ask him to correct the other party. I'd absolutely do it. And incidentally, I do this with the Bible all the time. The funny thing about the Bible is it's extremely difficult, dense piece of work. But when I want to correct somebody, oh man, the Bible is just magically clear. Martha says, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. I can apply this template to the vast majority of my prayers. Lord, blank isn't doing what is right by your standards, so correct them. I'm sympathetic to Martha because I have the same intuition. She believes that getting the house ready is the best way to honor Jesus. She has the Son of God in her living room, and it would be a dishonor to him if a bunch of trash was just lying around. She looks around the room and sees Mary not on board with helping, and she gets upset. And she gets upset because Mary is not doing everything she can to honor their guest. Martha wants to show her faith, her belief, her dedication to Jesus by correcting those she feels are missing the mark. Martha brought her expectation of action to Jesus, and with it she assumed that her correction of Mary was a way to show her love for Christ. But how does Martha's understanding ultimately shape her views of Jesus? First, it means that in her life of action, there's really no room for God. It means that following him is reduced to figuring out what is right above all other considerations of humanity. It's an obsession with doctrinal formulas, with judicial order, and ritual exactitude. It's an anxious hope, a painful struggle to meet the demands of morality and law. For Martha, following Jesus is about taking action and being right. It might not seem obvious, but we're right back where we were when we say thoughts and prayers. This is the same mode of thinking that characterizes the purpose of religion as an opiate. Just like my own prayers, Martha's actions have a lot more to do with her than they do with Jesus. For her and I, Christianity's ultimate purpose is action. And I'll say it again. In this world of action, it quickly becomes more obvious that there is no room for God. So what happens? What does Jesus do? Jesus simply says that Mary, in this moment, has chosen to do the more important thing. She has chosen to remain where she is, in the presence of Jesus. Of everyone in the room, only she is placing God at the center of her attention. And there's a lot to dig into here, because to understand Mary's actions is to understand the purpose of true prayer. Mary is doing what is both the most difficult but also the most essential thing at the heart of Christianity. She has resisted the temptation to make this moment about anything else but Jesus. She is embracing the presence of God. It might not seem obvious, but this is the only path that leads to love, grace, and mercy, not just for her, but for everyone around her as well. Now, we don't really get much at the end of the story. It just sort of ends at that point. So it becomes difficult to track sort of the impact of Mary's actions, how Mary's decision affects anyone else. But thankfully, throughout Christian history, we have had several men and women who have tried to do this exact same thing, to understand what is meant by embracing the presence of God. Here, I'm talking about saints. Now, in the Protestant evangelical church I grew up in, we actually rarely talked about saints. I really know about 3 saints growing up: St. Vincent, St. Valentine, and St. Patrick. The first one has an album that's actually pretty good recently. The other 2 are just holidays. But it was not too long ago that if you asked me what it meant to be a saint, what made a saint, I would be hard-pressed to answer in any specific way. Saints, I figured, were just really good people who sacrificed normal life to help other people. Eventually, they got recognized by their good deeds, and they made it onto a stained glass window in a Catholic church somewhere. Sainthood was clearly not something I ever heard was like a feasible vocation, or really something I saw as attainable in the world that I lived in. But for me, still, saints were just people who were honored first and foremost for their actions. But as I've learned, being a saint is a lot more than just performing great actions. There's this really revealing story about saints in the autobiography of Seven Storey Mountain by Thomas Merton. The book is Merton's journey from a relatively non-religious background to his eventual conversion to Catholicism and his entrance into a monastery to become a monk. Most of his journey is about understanding what a Christian life is amidst the needs of the world. Many times, Merton and his friends question the purpose of religion and its sufficiency to provide action to meaningfully solve the world's problems. Anyway, when Merton is in college at Columbia, one of his friends begins hosting a Hindu monk in his dorm room, I guess as one does, because it's the 50s. The only person, by the way, who's ever stayed in my dorm room as a freshman was my high school friend Choops. He ate all my Hot Pockets, and then when he left, and I'm not kidding, he stole the pants to my only suit when he drove back to Pittsburgh at 5 a.m. in the morning. But anyway, Merton's experience was different with people staying with him. He asks this Hindu monk what he thinks about Christianity. And at this point, Christian missionaries had actually been pretty active in India. They were evangelizing and doing relief work. The monk, whose name was Brahmachari, told him that it was impossible for him to see any of the Christian missionaries he had ever met as holy. That was his response. He said that they came in and built schools and hospitals, and that these things were actually needed and very useful. But he wondered if the Christians had any saints to send him. For Brahmachari, great actions and sainthood were not the same thing. See, he had read the Gospels and the works of early church leaders like St. Augustine, and he knew there had to be more to this Christian religion than just building things for poor people. God had to exist somewhere outside of these actions. And the funny thing is, these missionaries, by our Western standards, were undoubtedly living in extremely poor conditions and still doing incredible work. I know that my work in ministry pales in comparison to some of these things, to some of the things that these missionaries were able to accomplish. But to a monk from a different religion, it seemed clear as day that these men he was dealing with were not saints, no matter how many hospitals they built. He saw the purpose of Christianity as far greater than mere actions. So what exists beyond our actions? The Apostle Paul said that as a Christian, I live now, not I, but Christ who lives within me. What does that mean? It means anything that I do should not be me, but actually God acting through me. For prayer, this means that it is not me praying, but God praying within me to God. That's pretty confusing. The goal of our prayer, though, is for really our Christian faith is to get to the point where it's hard to tell where I stop and God begins. Imagine ourselves like a window with the light of God shining through us. The cleaner we can get the window, the more intense the light gets, the less you're able to see the glass. And that's the goal of prayer, and it's the thing we desperately have to recover. And so how do I do that? If I'm going to embrace who God is within me, I have to realize that my faith is about more than just accepting the facts of the Bible and Jesus. It's not blind and submissive to experts like, maybe this person making this video right now. On the contrary, it's a door to a full experience, which is both extremely personal and communal. So first, when we truly commit to prayer, we must realize how personal of a process it is. You and I are both made in the image of God. But you and I are not the same. God exists within you in a truly unique way. It's only you who can understand what that means. No tricks, no magic words, no good deeds will lead you to this self-understanding. You must empty yourself of everything that is not God, a process which brings you face to face with the deepest parts of your being. And what are those deep parts of your being? I've heard it called the God-sized hole or the abyss. But entering this place inspires a sense of dread because of what might come. Because it's a place where only God is in control. When I feel myself approaching this deep thought, I immediately want to turn around and run to a distraction. I avoid this place at all costs. I dread it because it means facing God on his terms without any of the comforts I am accustomed to. But this is actually true prayer. And now the crazy thing is that the deeper we head into this abyss within ourselves, the closer we actually get to one another. This is because the more empty we become before God, the more we begin to understand the grace, the mercy, the love, and love that God has extended to us. This unknowable place becomes our source of hope for each other and the world. When we see God in this infinite, unknowable way, it challenges all the parts of us that are not God. We begin to see him in the faces of everyone around us. As we do this in community, our own unique journeys are woven together in what we call the body of Christ. This is true community, the place where love, mercy, and grace, the things that are crucial to our own relationship with God, become the ways that become the place that dictates our orientation to those around us. I'm going to wrap this up by ending where we started with thoughts and prayers. For the saints, they were enough. They were not flimsy words to comfort people. They were not a mere pretext for meaningful action. For them, their thoughts and prayers were the foundation for their orientation towards the world and to each other. For them, prayer meant yearning for the simple presence of God, just like Mary does with Jesus. If we recover this meaning and believe this will give us a way to love one another, then maybe we'll have a chance to be like the saints. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, and I expect to screw up. But I'll leave you with the words of Thomas Merton when he says, "Be content that you are not yet a saint, but realize it is the only thing worth becoming." Amen.